two, one. Good afternoon in the United States, good evening in Europe, good overnight in Asia, and good morning perhaps in Japan, Australia, Hawaii, and who knows where. Welcome to the next edition of Fred Plotkin on Fridays. That makes me Fred Plotkin. And every week I invite people to talk with me who inspire me. That's the rule. They could be famous, they could be not famous, they can be people in music, which is primarily those who inspire me. But sometimes there are people I know very, very well. Occasionally, like today's guest, Emmanuel Villaume, music director of the Prague Philharmonia and of the Dallas Opera. He's someone I've known a little bit, who I admire, and I'm just going to get this out of the way, Emmanuel, right away. I think you're a fabulous conductor, and I've heard many conductors. So it's for that reason. I've always noticed that whenever you're conducting an opera, I like it more, to put in the plainest terms, even if it's an opera I know very, very well. What's interesting for me is 99.9% of the time, I've seen your back. So it's nice to see your face. Welcome. I know you're in California.
Yeah, so actually it's good morning in California.
Good morning, California.
It's a little early. Fred, I mean, the admiration is totally mutual. And I think in this curse of a pandemic, the beautiful thing is that we're meeting people or talking to people whom we don't have time normally to talk to. And so I've known you, I've followed some of your shows, some of your writings, and you have that feeling. I have a feeling I know Mozart, because working with him and being in his brain so often, you really feel you know that person. I have a feeling I know you because I have seen what you have done, but first and foremost, I know your passion, I know your love, I know your dedication to what we do. And so we have that friendship in common for something that makes us friends already. So it's great to see you, and I'm very happy to be here with you.
Great to see you. Let's actually take that word that you just used, passion. I tend to describe myself as passionate about almost everything I do, which I acknowledge can be exhausting for other people. But I'm not an aficionado. I don't appreciate music or food or culture or art or friendship, or let's not pretend sex, everything. I don't want to appreciate those things. I want to be passionate and give my all to those things and fully engage my senses. Do you think that people such as yourself who work so fully immersed in an art form, but also must draw from the world around you to feed that art form, live with a different level of energy, of passion, of engagement than people you might meet in daily life?
I think it's a very good question. And the very short answer is yes, I do. And now, what do you call passion? What do you call energy? I am Europeanly trained, and I studied philosophy, and psychoanalysis, for instance, something that interested me very much, both from the personal point of view and the intellectual point of view. So the notion of libido, vital energy that is in all of us, I think is something that is connected very much to artists. And I think in order to be an artist, you need to carry that vital energy that is coming from your senses, that's coming from your biology, that's coming from you wanting to possess something, to grab something, to share with people. So that level of energy is there. It's sexual energy that has been transformed into something else, sublimated into something else, magnified into something else. It's craving for something that we know will never be reached. It's trying to repair something within ourselves that is broken and that we desperately want to get together, although we know it's a vain path and we'll never get there. But every morning, every day, every time you are with your art, that's where you go. So it's a vital energy that is present, and I think it's very important. And if this business of ours, like for you, is only a job or a business, we're not good at it. It's a fundamental requirement that it is something that is non-negotiable, that is vital. And so it's not only, for me, a question of level of energy, but it's a question of, if I don't have this, I am dead. If I don't have this, my life doesn't make any sense. Things are not together. So, and all the artists actually I know and respect have that crazy level of vital force, libido, energy, craving, annoyance for their entourage. And I think it's very important. Even, you know, the ones that pretend to be a little detached, the Boulez school and so on, these people inside, it's boiling. And their calmness is just a result of something else that has been negotiated inside. And that's why they are so intellectually brilliant, and their art is brilliant, because they have compacted this. I am more of the exuberant, you know, French, Italian in many ways, because I worked a lot in Italy, like, let's put everything there, let's get it out. With time though, I believe I learned to channel that energy to get it projected even more. And I think that's very important for us. Otherwise we are just an explosion. Seiji Ozawa, with whom I studied, who is the epitome of energy on the podium. Yeah, I mean, just amazing. And the first time I conducted one of his orchestra, afterwards, he said, too much energy, too much energy. And I said, what? What is this? There is never too much energy. What are you talking? And you are talking about too much energy. And he said, yeah, I know you don't understand. You will understand later. And I finally understood this. And I wish I had understood that lesson from the very beginning of my career, because I know at the beginning, it was so important to me. It was so intense to me. It was so vital to me that I would put everything in every performance. And if you do this too much, it can saturate. It can even be a problem for some of the performers or the audience. So I learned to frame this in something that is going to awake the energy in the performers and the audience, not all of a sudden, oh my God, this is too much, I cannot deal with this.
Well, I agree with everything you say, and it raises many more questions. Number one, we have to juxtapose these passionate feelings among conductors, stage directors, singers, instrumentalists, and everybody involved, designers, stagehands, with the actual, we're talking more opera here for the moment, practicalities of getting on an opera performance, which means building a production, scenery, costumes, lighting, everything has to integrate, animals if there are animals. Everything kind of has to work, and the stage manager plays a big role in that, along with the conductor and the stage director, the person who does the production, the mise en scène. And then you have limited rehearsal hours. You have union contracts. You have time built in for coffee breaks. One time I remember when I worked at the Met, and we were doing the new production of Otto Schenk's Ring, and James Levine was conducting in the pit the most amazing Wagner sound, the orchestral passage of Die Walküre. And then the orchestra manager, whose name was Abe Marcus, I think, said, break time, and Levine just put down his baton, and everybody exhale, because they were just creating magic at that moment in the rehearsal. And so these are the logistics and practicalities, whether we like them all or not, they exist. And how do you, being the conductor and therefore one of the two or three most important people in charge in these things, and in your case, music director of the Dallas Opera, how do you integrate your passion, your drive, your moment of engagement with the actual logistics of limited time and money?
It's a very, very good question. And I would answer that in my personal life, I am not naturally someone who is necessarily organized. I used to be always late. I used to forget, you know, appointments. I used to write my homework, at the last hour. Typical artist, obsessional personality, and that's who I am. I learned very quickly that on the podium, you cannot do this. So bear with me a second. I am super organized when I'm on the podium. I always have a clock in my head. I know exactly how long is an opera. I used to write in the scores 20 minutes to the end, 10 minutes to the end, 5 minutes to the end. Now I know it, I feel it. So I remember a director of production in Dallas said, I've never seen this. You are arriving at the end of the piece 3 seconds before you had that cutoff. And that's because I really want to use, especially in the US where the time is extremely limited, you have less rehearsal time in general than in Europe. You need to use that time very wisely. And you need to have a strategy in case something doesn't go the way you want. And to use that time so properly that nobody also think, well, he's just trying to use the time to use the time. So I have a list of the things I want to achieve, and I go in layer. And if I have more time, then I go a little deeper in that layer. And sometimes that means spending 20 minutes on 5 minutes of music and then just going through till the end, because you know that's going to be better next time. You know that's also something you learn with time. Don't talk about the things that are going to fix themselves anyway. So being disorganized in my life and being super organized when I'm on the podium is in fact the same story. It's just an inversion of polarity, It's the same thing, actually. Being super strict or being totally disorganized, somehow it's just switching that. And that's exactly this Jekyll and Hyde I am on the podium. And I like to plan very much, but you need to be extremely flexible. So you need to be able, okay, the tenor is having a bad day, just let's keep that aria. The set is not moving. I have a plan B in my head, and it works like that. The beauty of this is that there is also, music is about time and space by definition. It's the resonance. The time doesn't exist without the resonance. The resonance is possible because of the space. And the space is moving, otherwise the space is dead. And so understanding that connection is very important when you are a musician and not getting lost in that. So having a sense of a time that is not the time of the clock is also very important as an artist. When you phrase, when you are going to go there, but maybe something will happen. So when you are rehearsing, you need to be able to divide yourself between those two things and be in a suspended time, aiming in directions that are not physical directions, that can be spiritual directions, but at the same time, you have the union clock going in the end. I kind of like this juggling with various parts of your brain and your personality. You need to have the partners that understand that, or you need to bring the partners that don't understand that with you. And very often it's the stage directors that do not understand that. So as a conductor, your job is also to just, tell them, listen, I think we need to move to the next scene, or I think you have more time on that scene. And I like that because as you know, I love theater. I consider myself as much a man of theater as a conductor of symphonic and opera. It's very important for me. And as I say very often, if I go to a show, even in very important opera houses, and something disturbs me, usually I'm a very good spectator. I love everything that my colleagues do, but I say, something is missing. It's usually a conductor that doesn't do much symphonic repertoire. And the same thing, if I go to the concert hall and I hear a Mahler symphony or a Bruckner symphony even, and I said, what's happening today? Something is missing. It's a conductor that might be very famous as a symphony conductor, but with no training or no love of opera. I really think you need those two words together to be performing at the highest level, both as an opera conductor and a symphony conductor.
Well, I'm not going to name a couple of names, but these are people you
Please
surely
do.
know personally. No. Later, we'll have some French or Italian wine or California wine.
Yeah.
And one of them, very famous conductor, I admire his symphonic work a lot, but his opera conducting leaves me cold because I think that he conducts symphonically. And I don't, he makes great sounds in the orchestra pit, but I don't feel that he's working with the singers to bring the moment. Let's take Le Nozze di Figaro. I'd never heard him conduct that, but Le Nozze di Figaro, you have to be with the singer every moment for the speed, the humor, and
Tell the
that's
story.
a very hard opera for, telling the story. And I would not want to hear this conductor conduct that. I know another very famous conductor who I'm sure you know, he and I are friends, who said to me that he's losing interest in conducting opera because he's so frustrated by the stage productions. And he's wonderful both in symphonic and in operatic, in both. But he is getting a little tired of seeing the operas that he understands from Mozart, Da Ponte, Hofmannsthal, Strauss, Wagner, in both sides, libretto and music, just not being understood. I don't want to say respected even, but understood by the stage director.
Right, but so by the director, yes. I kind of am not of that school at all. What you call Regie theater in Germany is called Eurotrash here. And I think, this is a very long and tricky conversation, but I think the United States, which is a country that is so rich intellectually, you have amazing spectrum of ideas and school and so on, is, if you speak too fast and too broadly, is sometimes very literal when it comes to interpretation of text. And, this is the only country on earth where people think that when the Bible says Earth is a certain amount of thousands of years, they believe it literally. A good part of this country, as we know, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but that's a reality. It's the only place on earth when you come in the country, they ask you, are you a terrorist? If you would ask this in Europe, they would say, "Ma che?" It's kind of a naive question. But here, the question of 1 equals 1 or A equals A, which is more tricky, is non-negotiable. In the European school, everything is hermeneutic. Everything is interpretation. Everything, there is no truth of a sentence. You need to really understand it in the concept. And the way you bring your intellect to it is making it true or not. And there are more sophisticated to explain this, ways to explain this, but I think that's a real difference. So for us in Europe, funny I said us when it comes to theater, the job of a stage director is to go to the heart of the piece, to the essence of the piece, understands the various tension of the piece connected to the architecture of the piece, understand, for instance, how the piece was working against censorship of the time without saying it, but in fact, this is a reaction, talking of Figaro, this is a reaction to that. And our job as stage director or performers is to understand that nexus, that organic system of contradiction, of unspoken to get spoken. And in order to express this, then you sometimes have to go against literality, even more so because we are in a different time. So to go to the truth of the piece, you have to betray the literal aspect of the piece. I think there is a very strong argument to make for this. But then you have even very sophisticated American intellectual journalists and so on saying, well, wait a minute. It says we are in Vienna and there is a sofa. Where is the sofa and where is Vienna? And then you could have, the most obedient stage director having the situation in Vienna and so forth, but the piece being boring as hell. Whereas you can have a brilliant stage director, and it's not Vienna, it's New York, it's not a sofa, it is whatever you want on a terrace with a pool, but the heart of the piece is very, very, very well understood. So there are many questions that arise from this. I like traditional staging too, or I would call it classical staging, as long as it's very well done, as long as that really heart of the piece, which is usually, the heart of the piece is usually what you don't understand about a piece. That's the question you have about the piece. Why are they doing this? Why is it there? Why are they not saying this? Usually when you have questions, that's where you start getting to really what the piece is about. And when a classical staging, you know, I mean, you worked with Zeffirelli, you know, he was a genius with that. Pizzi, it was wonderful with that kind of things. Ponel was a genius is this. I'm amazed when people consider Ponel as someone who was betraying in pieces. He was, I mean, for me, he was a literalist, you know, if you want to see this from a legal point of view. Slight different, but he was going to the heart of the piece. So when you're dealing with people at that level, I'm whole happy, bring it on, bring it on. But then if you have people who are just doing the direction, the stage direction, because that's what's written there and it's going to play itself, I don't like that. For me, it's lacking that bite, it's lacking that urgency, it's lacking that little edge, taking things with an angle so you can see the shadows. I don't see the shadows, I don't see the piece. Naturally, when you have stage directors who arrive and who don't understand at all the piece and try to impose a vision that has nothing to do with the piece, it usually doesn't work, or it works by accident, as happened to me in a Bohème by, I won't give the name, by a movie director, and he did not understand music, he did not understand Bohème, he had a crazy concept that had nothing to do with Bohème, but by mistake, it happened to work. The rehearsals were hell, but in the end, something absurd came on stage that had some interest. But so, you have modern staging that are really crap, pardon my French. You have traditional staging that are boring to hell.
On dit merde en français.
on dit ça, oui. And you have other things. So I don't like to categorize myself as for modern staging or for traditional staging. I'm for good staging. And good staging needs brain and needs a way to make the piece relevant to the performers and the audience today. As a programmer, you know, I have my voice at the table in Dallas with our wonderful general director, Ian Derr. And as a programmer, we need to be careful not to lose our audience. So we need to be aware that in Dallas, obviously, we have a very faithful audience, but they don't expect the same kind of style that you expect in Berlin. So we're not going to give them this crazy bathroom Rosenkavalier where you are in the bathroom the whole evening. I'm just saying, for example, which actually I wouldn't want to see either. But they trust us. So once in a while, we can have something that is more adventurous. What I realize is that if it is good, if it is well done, if it is thought through, it's going to work. The danger is that to make it work, it's easier to do it in a classical way than in an aggressive modern way. So that's why in the States, general directors are not taking risks because the risk is too big. The chances you're going to fail with a modern staging are much higher than the chances to fail with a traditional staging. And in fact, you rarely fail with a traditional staging. Does that make any sense?
I agree with you mostly. And there's one key thing you said that I fully embrace, and I say all the time, I felt as if you and I were in the same brain at that moment. I always make the distinction between traditional, which to me is dull, and classical, which means that you're rooting yourself in the sources of the work of art that you're dealing with. Now, where I'm going to push back just a little bit.
Please do.
You know that I'm an American, I'm a New Yorker, but I did most of my training and a lot of stage direction primarily in Italy, also Austria, France a bit, Berlin a bit.
Streller, who is a
And
genius of staging, for instance. You worked with
yeah,
Streller,
he
didn't
was
you?
my teacher. So he was remarkable, Giorgio Streller. And sometime maybe you and I will sit down and talk about stage directors in front of a live audience and what
Yes,
they
love
bring
to
and
do
brought.
that.
But the one thing that I feel that we have to always focus on, whether we're in Berlin, Dallas, Tokyo, doesn't matter, is we have to understand that when I say we, I mean the stage director especially, but then the conductor and the singers. The conductors, no, I don't have to teach them, obviously, but the singers, what the composer and the librettist intended,
Mhm.
but also the historical underpinnings of the opera. And where I would disagree with you just a little bit is I don't believe that American audiences, Japanese audiences, South American audiences, and even many European audiences have the historical preparation to know what's going on, whether it is the manners of the time, the gesture, the physicality of one performer to another, um, whether it's the history that informs Verdi, especially, but also other composers. With Puccini, and I know you conduct a lot of Puccini, and I want to talk to you about that. Puccini was more about, he had flavor, whether it's La Fanciulla del West in California, or Japan, or China, or Paris, or Rome for Tosca. To me, that was flavor, but he focused primarily on the female protagonist. With
Mhm.
Verdi, Wagner, Berlioz, Mozart, Tchaikovsky, Mussorgsky, there were issues and history involved. And I feel as a stage director, but also as a teacher about opera, that I need to bring that to the fore. And therefore, if I take something that's literal and make it abstract, I'm not helping anyone. And I'm going to knock the British a little bit. I love British theater, but I find that many British stage directors, when they direct Italian opera, even if it's like Lucia set in Scotland, um, they have generic ideas about Italian culture and Italian passion. The Italians are much more subtle, much more reserved than we think they are. The Russians, in many ways, are much more open and passionate. And the Italians keep closer than we think they do to themselves and their ideas. And
Correct.
the stereotype of Italy that's brought across in certain opera productions from outside of Italy about Italy are just wrong. And I find
And
often that
Napoli is not
many
Milano,
stage
and
directors,
Palermo is not Bologna.
yeah, Milano is not Bergamo, and they're very close and
Right.
similar in a lot of ways, but they're completely different. And therefore, when I encounter a stage director who has read the libretto in translation, does not speak the language of the opera, and therefore doesn't get the subtleties and what the composer responded to in making music that expresses the meaning of the words, but also the sound of the words, when all of that is lost and a gimmick is created, whether it's done in Berlin or New York, it doesn't matter. Um, that to me is cheating. That to me is being
I
sloppy and lazy.
Okay, so I understand your point. I agree with most of your point, but not all your points. So let's go to the part where I think there is a slight danger between major quotes in what you say. You need to be informed. The stage director, first and foremost, needs to be informed. And if he's not, he needs to have a dramaturge that really helps him understand the context in which the piece was written. I think this is not negotiable. Now, it's going to be different if you do Les Huguenots or if you do Péléas. Less important in Péléas. Very important if you do Les Huguenots. Very important if you do Nozze di Figaro. Now, I have seen so many, very important. It's not like that anymore, but in Europe, when there's been a big trend of hiring young American singers because they were always very well prepared with languages, usually good on stage with stagecraft, and very good vocal technique, much more than the average European. That was true for many years, and I think in some ways it's probably still very true. But there would be always a moment in the first week of rehearsal where the stage director would teach them how to walk on stage.
Yeah,
because they would walk like cowboys, you know, and that was a very. I mean, we were not PC then the way we are now. So say, don't walk like a cowboy would be the expression. And go, oh, what do you mean a cowboy? But then if it's you know, there would be that interesting cultural clash there. And being informed historically is absolutely fundamental. Being servile to this, I don't think it's good. And if the performers are informed, but the audience is not informed, that doesn't always work. And so if they don't have the context of the French Revolution and they see Not C'est di Figaro, they are going to miss a lot. And the traditional staging, as good as it is not going to necessarily give them this. That's why, actually, this is a very important topic, because it has to do with how accessible, how any audience can connect to this. We always say, and we always try to reach to new communities and new audiences. And the first barrier is a knowledge, education barrier that we need to find ways to break. And this is, let's not go down that rabbit hole, but it's also not going to happen if we don't listen to those communities. And that's why it's complicated, because if we teach down to those communities about you need to understand the posture of a Napolitan signore compared to a Borghese, you're going to say, well, that's not for me. Whereas, let's talk about the French Revolution and Not C'est di Figaro. What Not C'est di Figaro is about is a change of relationship between men and women, and a change of relationship between a power that is fading, but that is still holding to his power, and new smart people trying to take over that world. Okay? Very important to hear the piece, even, not even to understand the drama, but to hear the piece. Now, that conflict between who has and who has not, that's a universal conflict. It's very relevant today. So I can see a Not C'est di Figaro staging that would take some of this conflict and see it in modern times, that would help the audience understand what Not C'est di Figaro is about more than if you had a very classical, well-done staging that would just not make that point as relatable for a modern audience. So you see, there are several apps. Ideally, of course, the person who is going to do the transposition should have understood the first layer of the piece within its historical context. And for you and me, that's a given. Unfortunately, as you and I have seen, it doesn't happen all the time. And I would say it doesn't happen more often than it happens. The level of lack of culture of some of the people in our industry is quite remarkable. I'm sorry to say this so openly today, but that's stunning to me sometimes. They just don't know what they're talking about. And then you said the word, a word I relate to, gimmicks. When there is gimmicks, it's not going to work. If you have a brilliant brain that understands what the piece is literally, but find a ways to relate to the audience what it was with a story that is maybe more of a today's story, I'm all for it. And I'm against the people who are going to, oh, this is wrong. Well, who says, you know, it is transposed, but the transposition understands to take the metaphor like in harmony, you know, there is tension and release. The transposition is going to understand the tension and release in the story and with the music. And you and I, you, Fred, and I as a conductor or as a music director, we have a role to play in this so that we don't look like old farts who are holding on to things that are dying. We are not museums. Museum can be very alive. We are not only museums. We are presenting something that these people wrote because it had a non-negotiable, vital meaning to them. and to that society. So it's not only entertainment, it's something that is essential to the society, to this community, and to their lives. And we need to make it relevant and essential. Staging is practice.
Just yesterday, I had an impromptu interview where I was interviewed by a CNN journalist about why opera is relevant. And I said that it is about everything who we are. And opera is a young art form compared to most art forms except cinema and photography. I agree with most of what you said. One thing I wanted to point out from earlier is there's the factor of the audience. Never play down to the audience, but don't assume that they have the cultural background that you or I or some of the performers have. And it has to be relevant and in the moment. And therefore, when I teach opera, and I teach it both to audiences and to singers. In fact, increasingly, I teach opera to singers, not in terms of performing, but what these things are about, is that there has to be emotional truth. It doesn't have to be true as in accurate, but it has to be emotionally true in a way that we connect to it. So that when Susanna slaps Figaro, we know why she slaps Figaro, and we feel it. Senti questo. Senti in Italian means listen. It also means feel. So Da Ponte was making a pun there. And you don't have to know the language to know, listen, he says. Listen to that, she says.
Yeah.
And everything is about emotional truth. And I try in all my life and my work to connect people to their senses, to their emotions in ways that we tend to be dulled to by multimedia, by all the things that those who are not passionately engaged or not engaged with. So I try with audiences to make them, I don't like to use the word relevant, although I'm asked that all the time, but to make them see that that's me up there on the stage. And I mean, I remember once I was watching a performance of Otello, and there was a particular moment where the Desdemona, who happened to be Carol Vaness, did something that I just thought, that's me. And I've never before identified with Desdemona. And therefore, you really, if we engage passionately in opera, we sit forward, we listen, we don't sit back, we don't eat during the performance. They used to, but we don't want to do that anymore. It's so thrilling at its best because it's a mirror of life. The arts are there, and this is why we have to help artists in this tough pandemic period where a lot of them don't have work. The arts exist to tell us who we are, whether it's the creative artist who makes something new or the interpretive artist who, like you, who take existing works and bring them to us by your understanding and connecting and feeling plus talent, and bring them to us. So I know that you and I can stand this topic just for another 10 hours, but there are a couple of other things I want to ask you about, many things actually. I want to tell our listeners something about Dallas Opera, and please join in if you want. You know that I've worked at the Lyric Opera Chicago. The Lyric Opera Chicago was founded in 1954 by three people, by Lawrence Kelly and Nicola Ricchino, Lawrence being sort of a director, but also a inspiring person, Nicola Ricchino, a conductor, and above all, Carol Fox, who was a brilliant and difficult person. And basically, Carol Fox told Lawrence Kelly and Nicola Ricchino to go in 1956, 57. And they moved to Dallas. And Dallas already had an opera tradition, a notable one, because the Metropolitan Opera would do its annual tours beginning in 1883. And many times they went to Dallas, and the people of Dallas and Atlanta, especially those two cities, embraced opera in a big way when the Met came. The difference between Dallas and Atlanta is that Dallas and the people of Dallas, who are very particular, sought to create their own opera company. I mentioned Dallas and Atlanta because as a New Yorker, I've long known that many active citizens in those two cities compare themselves to New York. And if they can do or something that's better than New York, like getting the Olympics in Atlanta, not New York, like in the case of Dallas Fort Worth, this kills me still. There was a Michelangelo painting that was rediscovered a few years ago, and
Right.
it was brought to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and restored. And it was beautifully restored. And we had it for a month, and I would go look at it all the time. And then there was a bidding to buy it, to put it in a museum. And New York has plenty of billionaires who could have bought that for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. No, it's in the Kimball Museum in Fort Worth. They paid $76 million. Michael Bloomberg could have put that in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I'm not criticizing Dallas and Fort Worth. On the contrary, I'm admiring that these cities, the arts district where you are in Dallas, has the Winspear Opera House, a purpose-built opera house, not a multi-use hall. It has a wonderful concert hall, the Meyerson. Dallas actually has an arts district.
Right.
And for people who think of Dallas, Cowboys, whatever, they don't know that other side of that city. And I'm a frequent visitor, as you know, that's where I've seen you, because I love immersing in the art scene in Dallas. How about you?
So yes, what you say is absolutely right on the money. And Dallas, like many American cities, but in a way that's maybe a little more intense and Texan and bigger, is a very proud community. The new families or the old families are very proud of the city of Dallas. And that pride translates in a support for the arts. If you are a relevant city, if you are an important city, you need to have world-class museums, you need to have world-class symphony, you need to have world-class opera. And even the people who don't necessarily go to the opera, if they have the money, they are going to give to us. The system, you know, in Europe is totally different. Most of the arts are funded by the governments, by a few now official sponsors who want a very specific return. In the US, it's still some of those firms, but it's mostly individuals. This gives me, as a music director, a different sense of responsibility toward the audience and towards the money we have to deal with. In Dallas, as you say, the center of Dallas was basically a highway. The community decided to build a park above that highway and then to have 3 museums, 1 concert hall, and 1 opera house. And 4 of these, and I never remember it's 4 or 5, are done by Pritzker Prize architects. No other city in the world has so many of these monuments next to each other. It's absolutely vital, connected to the community. And for me, I always love that about the States. This can-do attitude, this, okay, let's do it better than Paris, Vienna, let's just go out for it, you know? And so that's something that is extremely inspiring. I was the music director of Spoleto USA in Charleston for many years, in one of the most stunning cities in the world. And I felt that vibrant support from the community. I could not see my role as artistic or music director otherwise. I learned that from the States. And when I am the boss of an institution in Europe, I try to install that kind of personal, very intimate, intense rapport with people in the community. I think it is very important. So Dallas was the Scala of the West. That's the way it was called. And you know, we for years the Dallas Opera, under Karianis and then Jonathan Pell, did fantastic things for this company. It was at Fair Park, but then the community decided to have an opera house that would be their opera house. And the Winspear family wanted that opera house to be of human size. So that's the paradox when you're Texan, in Texan, you want everything big, but here they wanted something big in terms of quality, but they understood you need to go with a smaller opera house, so 2,400 seats, which for US is very small, and with amazing architecture from Norman Foster. Beautiful building outside. I think opera houses need to be beautiful in the outside, need to signify to the city. It's like a cathedral, like a church. This is yours. You can come in there. It's part of the pride of the city there, and very inviting. And inside some of the best acoustics in the world. That connection between architecture, purpose, community, and as you say, the Dallas Opera is a child of the Chicago Lyric, and artistic legacy, all of those elements put together, that's the recipe for a great opera house. And so this is a great formula. We are trying to really push this now to the next step, which is in this environment very difficult. And this environment, it's not only COVID, it's also the struggle in the arts in general. And I think we can use COVID as an opportunity to connect differently to various communities, to resolve that impossible equation between online offering and in the hall shows. And so what COVID is doing for all of us, it's forcing us to do our revolution even faster. So what was planned for 3, 4, 5 years for the good people who were thinking ahead, you have to do it now. Yeah. You have to figure out your financing in this very difficult time. You have to figure out your presence online, how you monetize it, how you use this to reach different communities, how it translates on stage. And that's what we're doing. And it's actually extraordinary to do it in Dallas. I would say now between us, behind the scene, it's for a general director or music director, it's a little easier to do this in a city like Dallas than in a city like New York, Paris, Vienna, or Milano, where the level of negativity of the colleagues around is bigger. So they want you to fail because you got the position, they didn't get it. And Fred is laughing because you and I could tell so many stories about this.
But IDAGIO after dark.
Yes, but in a place like Dallas, for instance, there is none of this. The competition is with yourself and with the other city, but it's not within the city, and that's actually very refreshing and wonderful. If you have yourself this craving for trying to improve, trying to find, I know you and I don't like the word, but the relevance of what we do in a more intense way. So
one thing you said, that people in Dallas refer to themselves as La Scala West. So does Lyric Opera Chicago. When I worked there, I was trained that they were La Scala West. There is some truth to both, but I think Chicago came first. They brought Tebaldi and Callas first, and Callas had her American debut there. But then Callas opened the Dallas Opera in 1957, in November 57. And Joan Sutherland, John Vickers, Montserrat Caballé, Placido Domingo, Franco Zeffirelli, Teresa Berganza, Helga Dernesch all made their American debuts in Dallas. So that's pretty impressive. One more thing about Dallas, two more. The first is, I first went there in the 90s. I was brought by the Dallas Opera to teach. And I had a wonderful experience. I love the audiences and I love the artists. I had a fantastic time. Texas hospitality, where they don't let you pay for anything, even though you try to. They're very lovely, generous people. But I discovered one other thing about Dallas that I don't think many people know. Because historically, in many parts of Texas, there was the tradition of a good young woman and young man often needing to have a good cultural education, that many families had homes with pianos, with singing, they sang in church. They had excellent libraries in their homes so that people would have these fantastic books. Fast forward to the 1990s when I was there, and I went to used bookshops. And there is no city in the world, only Victoria, British Columbia comes close, where I have found so many magnificent books on music as I did in Dallas. And much of my library in New York was built in used bookshops in Dallas in the 90s. And I don't know whether you frequent used bookshops, how many there are anymore in Dallas, but the treasures there are fantastic.
Right. So there are fewer and fewer bookshops, and not to talk about record store, but there is one from a friend of mine, and it actually got destroyed in the last hurricane. There was some kind of tornado that went through Dallas, and that shop got destroyed, and she's rebuilding, which is kind of heroic because nowadays, I mean, I have been reading books online for a long time because with the 9/11 traveling got even more difficult and the suitcases weight got more and more limited. So you put 4 books in your suitcases and you just can't even check it, So now you need to read online. I always have one book maybe of poetry or philosophy in my suitcase because there is nothing like smelling the paper, and I like to do this. But we still have a few libraries, and she's rebuilding a library, and she's going to lose money. She knows that, but she wants to do it. And this is also in the talking about the Renaissance. This is also, or the French Revolution started in cafe, because it was the intellectual place, and cafe was also a library where you could exchange books and you could have conversations. I think that part is very important, and it's going to be lost. I think it's going to, Fred, we're going to lose this. We just have to accept it. These online conversation, I think there is something wonderful that we didn't have before, and so we need to capitalize on this. We need to make this work. And not being dumbed down like some people are trying to have us dumbed down. Instagram can be wonderful, but it's all about, show me how many houses you have, show me your chest if you can. Facebook and Instagram can also be places of intellectual exchange, and we need to retake that space. In order to retake that space, we need to be also very honest. We need to talk a little more openly about who we are and what we can offer. And so that's why I think what you are doing is very important. It's very, very important. The pandemic made us Zoom, saturated, but we learned something too. And so I think we have to really take those lessons, think ahead. Think ahead. What's going to happen in our art form in 5, 10, 15, 20 years? If we don't change something, we're dead.
I had an idea about 20 years ago, and I contacted then Mayor Michael Bloomberg, maybe 15 years ago. I live in New York, where space is at a premium. And when people die, their books, what do you do with their books? And I wrote to him and asked him if he would buy or build a warehouse in Queens, which is the most diverse borough in the world. And it would be called the Library for Collected Knowledge. In other words, when I walk on the streets of my neighborhood near Lincoln Center, I often see stacks of books in Yiddish, in Spanish, in Portuguese, in Chinese, in Russian that have been put out on the street when someone has died and the person taking care of the remains don't know what to do with them. To me, that's a tragedy. And
you're totally right. Totally.
And for example, for every rare book that I or you might have that would wind up in this library, there might be 1,000 copies of Les Miserables or To Kill a Mockingbird. And what you do with those books, rather than keep 1,000 copies in the library, you give them away to young people or anyone who wants a book, because it's a precious thing to have a book, and reading opens whole worlds, as I don't need to tell you. But to me, it's a tragedy throwing out millions of books that are irreplaceable. What I bought in Dallas and what I've bought in Italy based on my collection of Verdi, these cannot be replaced. I know that. Many of my Verdi books just don't exist elsewhere, and I'm
Right.
concerned about what will happen to them.
On the other hand, Fred, I totally agree with you. And just an apartheid, you know, we lost our house in the wildfires in California. We are rebuilding the house, remodeling the house. And there was at one point a question, well, the books are gone. Are we going to build another library? Do you need another library? And I wanted a library, and I'm going to take, I have, you know, boxes of books in Paris. We also have an apartment in Paris, and I have enough books to do a library here. So I will make a point to have a library. And I know when I'm in Paris, if I want to read something, I go to my library. And actually my books are all, you know, kind of destroyed because I like to read them in the bath. So they start to undulate a little. That's the way they should be. And there are, you know, coffee marks and whatnot. But what I want to say, what you say about library of people who died being
Collected
forgotten,
knowledge.
that is terrible. That is terrible because a lot of those books, they are not in the Library of Congress. And this is our memory being lost. And if we don't do this, people in 300 years will say, these people were fools, you know? But what we need to do, what you should do, Fred, if you have not done it, you should digitalize the books that you have, that you know are rare books and that they're the only prints. So if by any chance that book is lost, it's not lost for the memory of humanity for the future, you know. And so you should find someone who just digitalize it and it's accessible, or it's somewhere where it's not going to be burned and being lost. That brings me to another question and I don't know how you resolve those issues, but classical music is more and more expensive to produce because it's handmade with hand labor, intellectual labor. These are things that are more and more expensive in our societies, where everything is done through artificial intelligence or robots. Playing a Schubert sonata is not going to be done by a robot the same way that it's done by a human being with the real connection with an audience, be it in a private salon or on stage. On the other hand, communities are less and less able to sustain this. And more the arts have to engage with the net, with the digital world. And I feel a part of you nostalgic and sad about this. There is a part of me which is incredibly nostalgic and sad about this. But the way we feel doesn't matter. This is happening. So we need to resolve that equation. We need to understand how still make the stage possible, actually sell it to people as something that is even more valuable nowadays, because we are losing that culture. And I think making that case in a smart way, not condescending way, is the key to our survival. But we need to connect the screen and the stage. We need to find a way to connect the screen and the stage that works. And that's what we are doing today, but there needs to be also a creative way of doing this. So in a way, the HDs, which is, you know, a big success of the Met regime, the HDs have done some of this, but we need to find a way to make this work also in individual homes for people, to bring them to the opera house, but there needs to be a level of content online that maybe you could not have otherwise. I'm thinking also of, we were having a discussion about virtual reality, for instance. Bear with me for a second, Fred. You are an historian of our art form. The way those first operas were written in the Baroque age or the pre-classical or in the Renaissance was the time of a candle. An act could not be longer than the time of a candle on stage. And then you would change all the candles. You might change then the little drop, the painting you had in the back, and you would go to the second act, which would have a different location and a different painting. The type of the light, the length, the fact you had to be in one place only during one act was creating a certain type of dramaturgy, a certain type of stories that you could tell, which in return would influence the type of music you would write. When all of a sudden the gas lamps were invented, it changes the kind of furniture and sets you could have on stage. All of a sudden, you didn't have the toile peinte, you didn't have those paintings dropping, beautiful paintings that were a little shadowy. You had more aggressive lights, and with those more aggressive lights, you could build different furniture. You could have something that was more built on stage that would influence a certain type of realism in the story that you didn't have before, and a different way of telling the story than before. And all of a sudden you could tell the story, you could change the sets, you don't have to change the candles. So that would influence totally the type of operas that would be told. With each new technological invention, there would in turn be a different way of writing libretti and a different type of music. I think we are behind in the operatic world in understanding what is the next technological revolution that's going to change the way we tell stories. I think the use of laser, the use of virtual, masks and so on, could make us able to tell and to build and to write different operas. And I think that's the key. That's one of the keys to the future. That doesn't mean Nozze di Figaro is not going to happen again anymore. On the contrary, it will be a juxtaposition. Like you have Orfeo, you have Nozze di Figaro, you have Walküre, you have Tsar und Zimmermann, Wojciech, and the Girls of the Golden West. All of this, I do think the way we are going to be still alive in 10, 20 years is if we involve new technologies. I don't have totally the answer to this, but one composer, one librettist, and one general director one day will order that opera that takes into account those new technologies, and a new door will be open. You and I always thought, well, we are at the end of the road in terms of, atonality, and somehow this is the end of history of music. I think it's not the end of history of opera if we integrate those new technologies.
Well, I would only say that opera, in my view, and this is what I spoke about yesterday on CNN, has been in the avant-garde in terms of technology. Mm-hmm. Always has. It was the first to electrify theaters in Milan, Berlin, and London in the 1880s, then Paris. And it was the first with recordings and with radio and streaming and all these things. So I have confidence about that. The only two things. I'm not nostalgic for the past. I look to the future, but there is something that cannot be replaced about being and breathing the same air as the person making the art. And the person making the art feels me in the audience breathing that air. And when you and I are in a room, even if you don't know I'm there, and even if there are 3,000 other people in the room, I'm part of your energy and you are part of my energy.
Absolutely. And a beautiful performance, sorry to interrupt you, but I am one other person of that school. There is nothing that would replace that presence. And a beautiful performance is going to be informed, influenced, changed by the presence you have in my back as a conductor and how I feel I'm connecting to the audience or not. And it's always stunning to have people who have been at the opera house hear a singer from close, for instance, in a private home with a pianist, and their eyes and their ears popping like they have never, oh my God, this is incredible, because they are even closer to this. And as beautiful as the filming in the HDs has been with the Met, there is nothing like that present on stage. I 100% agree. And that's what we need to sell to other people. But I share your optimism about opera. You're right. And this is something people don't know very much in our industry, how much opera has been influenced by technology and has been ahead with technology. I feel in the last maybe 20 years, we are not ahead. And because there is a gap, there is something very, very difficult to resolve. And maybe the technology is not entirely there too, you know, talking of virtual reality and that kind of things. But we need to find that path. We need to find.
I think I know the answer to the problem that you're posing, not how to fix it, but I know the answer. We have been emphasizing the visual. You are a musician. When I teach opera, I tell people that the primary method of emotional and narrative communication is in the music. And even though I come from a stage direction background, I am the first to say that it's music first and then the theater. And we are not teaching people how to listen. They hear, they don't listen. You and I have been actively listening to one another for the past hour. And it shows. And I think people watching and listening to us, I hope have been engaged by the degree to which you and I have done a great deal of listening to each other. I'm listening to the clock, and I know that I have to conclude with you soon, but I wanted to mention a couple of things to have you address briefly. Number one, the Heart Institute, HART, in Dallas for women conductors is the first in the world. Would you tell us about the Heart Institute?
So the Art Institute for Women Conductor is an institute that was created by the Dallas Opera. It actually was Keith Cerny in the time who had the first idea. It needs to be credited for that. And the idea was, it's complicated. It's maybe even for some people controversial, but it's about gender equality on the podium. You cannot correct this artificially. You cannot just take ladies and say, we need 50% of ladies. That's not going to work. But what you can do is help the young ladies who have talent as musicians or as young conductors and give them the tool to compete on an equal field. And that was not happening because somehow first some of those ladies didn't think they could be conductors because that's not the way they were culturally feeling things, or it was imposing them, and or because they never had that first step. So the idea was to provide them with a few classes if they needed to. If, for instance, these were ladies who had an opera, a symphony career but had not done opera, so we would give them those master classes to help them, you know, in contact with singers and an orchestra, slowly to decompose what were the technical or artistical issues that they could be confronted with. And you can do a lot actually in 10 days with that. You can really, you and I have been all of a sudden thrown into the fire at one point. I guess if you had to do a stage rehearsal and you had never done it before, all of a sudden you learn so much when you do this. And I have seen this, I've lived this personally, but also to have this, give those young ladies access to agents, to people from the recording industry, to people who are potential artistic director who are going to give them contracts, to interact with them, to see how to navigate that funny maze that's called a career. So we have done this, and I think we were the first company to really do this at an international level, and that has literally changed the field. That has changed the field very, very positively, and a lot of our alumni now are having careers, or music director or artistic director of many, many companies. The idea again was not to artificially push women in position, but to give them the tool to compete with other men in the field. And we preach what we do what we preach. I think this expression in English. And we hire also some of these women to conduct our show. Lydia was the music director of the other theater in Chicago.
Chicago Opera Theater.
Thank you. I knew you were going to save me on that one, is going to conduct Nozze for us, and Caroline Wilson is going to conduct Tosca for us next season in our revamped schedule in the spring.
Good. So the other thing, I mean, there are many, there are going to be two more. One is I asked my guest each week to provide a list of things to listen to from Adagio. And you offered Charles Munch conducting the Boston Symphony in various classics, Fritz Wunderlich singing Schumann's Dichterliebe, Puccini's La Fanciulla del West with the famous Tebaldi recording Tre assi e un paio, Carlos Kleiber, the Vienna Philharmonic, Beethoven 5 and 7, which many of my guests have proposed, Richard Strauss, Die Frauen Schatten, the famous Carl Böhm, Birgit Nilsson, Leonie Rieseneck, Ruth Hesse, James King, Walter Berry, Vienna State Opera production. Why, of all the operas, I understand Fanciulla, would you have picked Die Frauen Schatten?
I have a fascination for the Frauen Schatten. Many reasons for that, but I think Frauen Schatten, to go back to our discussion about relevance in time and cultural truths that become questionable in a new time and the way you translate them. The Frauen Schatten is really a late 19th century concept pushed in the 20th century so far that it's a different 20th century that never went anywhere. It's maybe a dead end, but if someone picks it up later, maybe you are going to go with this. So it's truly a very relevant piece of the 20th century done with push to the max 19th century concepts. I love the piece. I'm always asked, and thank you for not doing this, what is my favorite opera and what is my favorite symphony? I cannot answer that. I usually answer by, well, maybe I can tell you what my favorite Strauss is now, and I would have to answer it's the Frauen Schatten, because it's all over the top. It's crazy. And that recording with Rieseneck, James Kidd,
Birgit Nilsson, yeah.
That's Birgit Nilsson. I mean, don't you want to hear that? It's and it's not forbidden. You can do it. I
heard that live in 1976 in Munich, October 3rd, 1976. I remember the date. Yeah.
And you survived that?
And I met Birgit. Yeah. This story takes a half hour, so you and I will do this over some Riesling from Alsace. But when I teach that opera, among the things I point out were Strauss's obvious regard for Mozart, and how, for example, the Rosenkavalier is linked to Le Nozze di Figaro, and this opera is linked in many ways to Die Zauberflöte, with one additional thing, that it was completed and presented at the end of World War I, at a time when millions of people between the war and 20 million people dying of the pandemic that they had then, the world was depleted of young men, of children, and so on. And this opera is about wanting to have a child. Similarly, Les Mamelles de Tiresias was about producing many, many children. And there are operas and works of art that we see at that time that are about making children and the importance of repopulating the world. And that to me is...
in the Mamelles de Tiresias.
Yeah. And so these works connect to us. I mean, you and I, we don't like the word relevance. Pick any opera, we can talk about how it has meaning to human beings then and now. And what all of that means.
Right, but you see what you say about the Frauen Schatten, it seems like the most impossible, bizarre story. But for me, the intensity of this, even you have the unborn children.
Yeah.
Already that concept
is of unborn children, yeah.
Yeah, and it's played with a glass harmonica.
Yeah.
That speaks to me more than anything else, So the fact it's off, the fact it's in another word, the fact it's irrelevant to that century, but in fact there is a connection to that century and to us, what makes me, absolutely mad about that piece. Love that piece.
As I often say,
because it's too big, and you need a music director to do it. So no music director in his sane mind is going to give that to a guest.
Well, as I often say in different contexts, the artists are here to tell us who we are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you have been positively illuminating to me for a long time, although this is our first long discussion. But I know that you have just illuminated, you've shown light, and you've awakened ideas in many people listening. And while I would love to continue this conversation for another 2 hours, il faut partir de là, as they say in the French opera. And Emmanuel, thank you so much for this really wonderful conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Fred. And that glass of wine is there for you anytime. We need to organize this, and maybe online, but definitely in reality as soon as possible, please.
Avec plaisir. Thank you.